Mondale, and they're not all the same opinions, and some people, say different things. But so this is my own understanding of Baba's silence, is that he kept silence, that everything Baba did was of a universal nature. Like, Baba didn't keep silence for his own spiritual advancement, we know that. So it was obviously a central feature of Baba's universal work was his silence. And so one way of understanding Baba's universal work that I assume other people have too, is that his work was archetypal. In other words, what he did as a single human being, it was as if the entire universe was doing it. So if he kept silence for 44 years, it was as if everyone in the universe kept silence for 44 years and gained the benefit of that silence for 44 years. Now, what's the value of silence? Baba said that external silence should only serve as a reflection of an inner silencing of the mind.
Could you repeat that?
Yes. That Baba said that external silence should only serve as a reflection of the inner silencing of the mind to be able to hear and respond to the dictates of the heart. I don't think that's an exact quote, but it's a pretty close to a quote from Baba. So, and Baba said that the result of his work, let me just raise this a little bit. The result of his work would be a stepping up of creation from the level of reason to the level of intuition. In other words, his work, on one level, if you take that statement about the inner silence and that he's always speaking, his work was to make available to humanity as a whole that capacity to be able to listen to the inner voice. That was what his work was about achieving. So his silence was at least a primary, if not the primary vehicle that he used to create or deepen that channel of receptivity. As he said it's for those who are ready to hear it. And he said that would unfold over time, that more and more of humanity would be ready to hear it, but now, there's a segment of humanity that's able to tune into that channel. But that channel would become more and more available as his manifestation unfolded. And hearing that voice then allows us to, in my view, to know through his intuition what is his wish for us. That's what intuition tells us. What is Baba asking of us? What is Baba looking to show us that can guide us in every situation in which we find ourselves? That's my experience and my understanding of what intuition is. So I was thinking about Baba's silence as I reflected on the meaning of Baba, meaning of obedience being a gift from master to man. And I said, okay, if the silence is about helping to deepen my capacity to listen, what is it that I'm listening for? Now, I took a leap here into a different realm. I started thinking about the prayer of repentance. Now, we all know I assume everybody here knows the prayer. I'm looking around, I think I know everybody in here. Everybody knows the prayer of repentance. This is a prayer that Baba gave out in 1953. And he placed great importance on this prayer. We know that. He encouraged people to recite it every day, along with the Master's Prayer and the Beloved God Prayer. And he even participated in the prayers. Even in those last years, when his body was so broken, he could barely stand without extreme pain. And even then, he stood in Mondale Hall next to Erich for the recitation of the Baba's prayer, of these prayers. And he placed great importance on it. He said it would be of immense help to humanity over the years for people that he had participated in these prayers himself. So I got to thinking about this prayer. This is the prayer. And I started thinking about one part of this prayer that's of particular interest to me for this topic, is this last line. It says, in your unbounded mercy, we ask you to forgive us, O God, for all these sins committed by us. These are all the sins up here. All these sins committed by us, and for our constant failures to think, speak, and act according to your will. Now, that always troubled me in my early years. Like, what does that mean? Constant failures to think, speak, and act according to your will. Because didn't you say, Baba, that nothing happens except by your will?
Yeah.
Isn't that? So how could there be any failures to think, speak, and act according to your will if everything happens by your will? Isn't that, and did any of others of you ever sort of wonder about that statement? Yeah, it's a questionable statement. So I was in Mondeley Hall. Actually, Pamela, you might have been with me there. And I was in Mondeley Hall once with Erich. And Erich, out of the blue, no context, no question, no nothing, just starts talking about the prayer. And he says, you know what's interesting about this prayer is that last line always bothered me. I'm quoting Erich. That last line always bothered me because it doesn't make any sense for the same reason I just said. But he said, actually, the truth is that this prayer was given out in Gujarati by Baba. And the word that he uses for will is a word called marji, M-A-R-J-I. And it's a Gujarati word that actually could be translated as either wish or will. Now, what happened was when the English translations of the prayer were done, however it happened, it got translated as will. And it got printed up all over the place as will. But in fact, yeah, and Erich pointed this out to Baba, and Baba said, well, let it be, like that. He didn't correct this. Maybe that was his avatar mistake, I don't know, but that is what Erich said. So then it made sense to me, because then it really does start to read like, in your unbounded mercy, we ask you to forgive us, O God, for all these sins committed by us, and for our constant failures to think, speak, and act according to your wish. Then it really does make sense. Because the things that we might do, whether it's backbiting, lustful actions, thinking badly of others, whatever it is, if we do them, yes, it's according to Baba's will, but that's not necessarily what Baba's wish is. And Baba made a clear distinction between what's his wish and what's his will. So from that point on, I actually started saying the prayer differently. I'd say it like this, because constant failures to think, speak, and act according to your wish. And I did this for a few years, and this is just a little postscript to that story. A few years later, I was in India, and I was at the Samadhi doing RT one morning, and I'm surrounded by all these people, dozens and dozens of people there, and everybody's saying the prayers, and they're all saying, forgive us for our constant failures, to think, speak, and act according to your will. And I said to myself, come on, Daniel, get with the program, stop being, sticking out here. And so that morning I said will. And then later that day, we all went to Marizal, and we're sitting there in Mondeley Hall, and Erich is there. And wouldn't you know it, out of nowhere, Erich tells the exact same story again. It was just.
What did he say?
He told the same story about Baba having used the Gujarati word that actually meant wish. And he went through the whole thing again about the difference between wish and will. And he said, he was trying, it was like Baba saying, pay attention. It actually does mean, at least for you, I mean, I was there, so that's mine. Now you've all heard this, so it's now up to you to decide. But for me, it was just such a clear message from Baba. Yes, this is what I mean by it. So,
Well, wait, you just said it can mean either wish or will.
I said it can, but what I said earlier is that the meaning of will doesn't make any sense. And that was Erich's
Right.
point. It's the word wish that actually makes sense and makes the prayer meaningful. Because the prayer then becomes, forgive me for not continually attuning to what your wish is around all these different things about thinking of others, all the stuff that's in prayer.
Well, thinking of what would please Baba.
Thinking of what please Baba. So I started thinking to myself, again, I'm preparing for this program with LeBron to give, and I started thinking, this failure to follow Baba's wish could actually be properly understood as a failure of obedience. That's another way of understanding, actually, what does that mean? Is that when I am not following what Baba's wish, I am not obeying him. Like that, because his wish, Baba would want us to obey his wish for him, as I see it. Now, Baba often, so the question is, what constitutes Baba's wish? Right, isn't that a good question? So, I'm going to suggest two things about that. That Baba, first of all, gave certain indications of what his wish was. For example, he would give out something a message like this, which a well-known message. I assume you all know this message. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I think we can all recognize. This is what Baba said. His wish was the lover has to keep the wish of the beloved, and to do so, here are the things that go along with that. So that was Baba's wish that was broadly applicable. Like that, as far as I can tell, that was Baba's wish for all of his lovers. Then there would be Baba's wish for specific lovers. I want you to fast. I want you to refrain from, I want you to keep silence. I want you to not mingle with people of the opposite gender. I want you to do, like, those were specific wishes that Baba gave to people by way of orders. So there's all of that body. So if we say, well, what constitutes Baba's wish? That would certainly be one whole dimension of what we know to be Baba's wish. That would then be a focus of obedience. But I also want to suggest that there's another level. And so I'm going to divide this into what I'm going to refer to as obedience that's of an exoteric nature and obedience of an esoteric nature. So just to define these terms really simply, these are some definitions I found on the internet, and these are sort of the ones that I'm most conversant with, is that exoteric basically means of an external source. So Baba's speaking, that's external to us. Or a message that we read, in a book or something, that's all external. Or Baba's saying, don't smoke, don't do this, like that, that's all external. But then there's the inner aspect of obedience, which is, I'm going to call the esoteric aspect. You might have a different term for it, but it's a simple way of thinking about it. So, Baba, in my view, placed great emphasis, of course he placed exacting emphasis on the exoteric obedience. He expected people to follow that. No question about it, unquestionably. But I would say that he actually placed equal, if not even greater importance on the inner obedience, or what might be called the implicit obedience. This is something Baba said. He said, if you obey implicitly and unquestionably, you win. And Baba always seemed to emphasize wanting people to learn how to obey him implicitly, not only explicitly. Of course, he placed great emphasis on the explicit. So, for example, there's an interesting story, and there are dozens of these that are in the books, and probably many of us have these examples from our own lives. But this is a story from William Donkin that I got from the New Life. Donkin, of course, was a great disciple of Meher Baba's. He was an Indian doctor.
Go back to that statement.
I'm sorry?
The statement before this, Duncan.
This one.
Mm-hmm.
You want that statement?
I just want to,
Okay. So I'll keep talking about Donkin while you're doing that. So Donkin was a British physician. He was a great disciple of Meher Baba's. Many of us have probably read the book that he wrote on Baba and the Musk. It's called The Wayfarers. But really an extraordinary human being, an extraordinary disciple. And he was one of the few men Mandali who actually traveled with Baba in the New Life. And he went through, the New Life was several phases. There was the begging phase, there was the gypsy phase, I think it was called the Langoti phase. There was the labor phase. There were different phases. So Donkin went through the first two phases, and these were tough phases. I think they were, from what I can gather from having heard Erich and others talk about them, this was like some of the toughest part of their lives with Baba, were these phases. And Donkin went through them along with the other men Mandali. And then after the Langoti phase, they were in Dehradun, and Baba then changed the rules up. And he said, I'm going to give you an alternative now. You can either stay with me. He gave this to the men Mandali. He didn't give it to the women, but he gave it to the men. You can either choose to stay with me and live the new life with me, or you can go off and live the new life on your own. Have your own home, do your own business, what have you. He said people were free to choose which one. And Donkin Donkin actually chose to leave Baba and live on his own. And later on, he wrote to Elizabeth Patterson about this, and he said, the reason I did that was because I felt that's what Baba wanted from me. Right? Like, that's pretty, to me, was a pretty profound example of what I think, what Donkin felt he was being trained to do by Baba was to listen. And I think the Mandali all were trained to listen. What do you feel Baba is asking of you? And to be responsive to that. Because, I remember Erich wrote us a letter once, and he said in the letter, he said, Baba, it wasn't like Baba was kind of dictating orders and directives all the time. He said that wasn't really Baba's way. That Baba, Baba wanted us to learn how to read him. He wanted to learn us how to feel what he wanted from us. It wasn't like he was just telling us all the time what to do. And you can get that impression from Baba, that he was always telling people what to do. And maybe in the early years that was true, but it was true less and less over Baba's life. I think that's a fair statement. And toward the end, even when people went to Baba and they would ask him, what should I do? What profession should I follow? Or things like this. Toward the end, he wouldn't even tell them. He'd say, follow your own dictates of your own heart. And that's, I'll help you with that. But that's what you should be doing. So over time, he was directing people more to the inward, implicit guidance. And I would call that the esoteric level, the esoteric obedience. And I'd say, for those of us who are living today, of course, we don't have Baba in the physical body telling us what to do. I mean, yes, of course, we've got the broad messages, no drugs, we know all these things, so that's it. But that doesn't cover very much of, I don't know about your life, it doesn't cover a lot of my life. It doesn't cover a lot of the choices I have to make in my life. And where I want to bring my life into alignment with Baba, I can't go to the books and find the answers to those questions. They're just not there. So I've got to have some other source for finding the guidance if my intention is to bring my life into alignment with Baba, which I assume that's everybody's intention here, is to do that. So if that's the case, then there's a challenge. And this is what I think the challenge is how do we find, or I'll make this personal, how do I find and strengthen that inner channel with Baba? So I can have access to that inner guidance more deeply, more consistently, more clearly over time. I think probably some of you in this room may know this story, but it's a good one about Elizabeth Patterson. Elizabeth Patterson founded the center, and she's a great disciple of Baba's. She was with him in India for many years, and then Baba sent her here to the States to found a center for him, which we're all wonderful beneficiaries of the center that she founded. And the way I've heard many times, I've heard this from Charles and Wendy and others, that every morning, Elizabeth would sit on her bed and ask Baba, what are you asking of me today? Have you all heard this story? That's what she would say. She would sit on her bed and she would say, Baba, what are you asking of me today? And then she said, and then the date would become her answer. Now, I found that a very compelling thing. In fact, I actually heard Charles give a talk about this once. He was trying to demythologize some things about Elizabeth and Marina and Nadine in this talk. And he said that a lot of people think that the way these women who were with Baba and very close to Baba, Baba called Marina his spiritual mother, that a lot of people thought that the way that Baba, that they were with Baba is that Baba directed everything they did. And he was saying that actually wasn't at all true. He said there was very little of that actual direction, that almost everything that they came to rely on was their inner guidance from Baba. That was how they lived, like that. And I thought, wow, here we have a disciple who was trained so deeply, so directly by Baba for so long, and even she had to have a practice that she had cultivated to help her learn how to and be responsive to Baba's inner guidance. So I felt like, well, I don't want to make a complete connection here, but if she has to find that practice, how much more do I need to place an emphasis on finding that own practice for myself? Because there are many times that I find that I would need, I need answers to questions. And they're not, they're questions, should I do this or should I do that? Sometimes they're big questions. Sometimes they're little questions. Like, Carol and I, should we go out to a movie tonight or not? But, I want to do that in guidance. I'd rather do that with Baba than away from Baba. So, that's called bringing my life in alignment with Baba. That's a simple one. But then there are big questions like, I'd worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture for 16 years, and I had a great job there. Not a good job, a great job. And I went to Baba and I said, should I stay in this job? And Baba said, no, you should leave. That was with a great job. And yet, I felt Baba guiding me to say, no, you're done. It's over, like that. So it's about things that are big and small. And of course, Baba said, there's no difference in the spiritual life between big and small. Remember that from the discourses? He said there's no difference in terms of their spiritual importance about, if we're seeking guidance in little things is just as important as seeking guidance in big things. Like we shouldn't make any false distinctions if our intention is to really bring ourselves into full alignment with Baba. So I started, I started this years ago of making an effort to try to do this. Like when I had decisions, bring them to Baba and sort of say, what's your guidance for me about doing this? Doing whatever it is, leaving my job, going to, doing this activity, should we take this trip, whatever it is. Is it time to go to India? That would be one that I would ask. Any of you ever do that? So, but one of the things I found, and this I found for myself, was a precondition for asking for this kind of guidance. I hope you're all seeing how this is relevant to obedience. Are you all seeing that? Okay. I found that there was a precondition that was very important, I felt was very important, which is before I ask for Baba's guidance, I actually say, whatever you give me, I am committed to following. I felt that putting myself into that position with Baba to say, I'm committed to following. You give me guidance, I'll follow it. As clear or as unclear as it is, I will follow to the best of my discernment of what that guidance is, I will follow it. Now, I want to take a little side trip with you, just about commitment for a moment, because I love this quote. It's been really an inspiring quote to me in my life. For many, many years, I read this quote 30, 40 years ago, and it's always stayed with me. And it relates to this, what I'm talking about, commitment. This is from a guy named Murray, who wrote a book called Everest, the West Ridge. It's a National Geographic book. It's about climbing Mount Everest. But I love this quote. It says, until one is committed, there's hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there's one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one commits oneself, then providence moves too. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents, meetings, and material assistance, which no man could have dreamt could have come his way. I have learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. I love this quote. Because to me, this quote says a lot about commitment, for sure. It says, if you're going to do something, commit to it. And so when I go to Baba with a question saying, when I turn to him and say, what is it that you're asking of me relative to this situation, this choice, this decision, whatever it is that I'm asking about, that I'm facing. And I say to Baba, and whatever you guide me to do, I'm committed to doing it. And I will do it as fully as possible. And I call that kind of a both feet in the circle approach. And I consider that both feet in the circle approach for myself fundamental. That if I'm going to ask for Baba's guidance, in such a way that I really intend to receive it. So, once I asked Baba for guidance, I've gone to him, I've said, this is the guidance I want. Then the question is, what is the language in which Baba speaks? Right? Because you can go to him, like, asking the question's one thing, but that only sets me up for the listening. So what am I actually listening for? Because for many years I would go to Baba with a question, and initially when I first started doing this, I think I expected to hear kind of Baba come from on high with a big deep voice saying, this is what I want you to do. Right? And I didn't find that I got that very much. I don't know if I ever got it, but at most it would be a rarity. And if I got a voice like that, there was always in the back of my mind the question of, is this really Baba's voice, or is this just my mental construct of what I think Baba would be saying to me, or what I would want Baba to be saying to me, right? I'm seeing some heads nod, so I don't think I'm the only one who feels that. So, what I started to find and started to feel was that actually, maybe Baba's way of speaking isn't through words. Maybe words are more the language of the mind and not the language of the heart. And so I started to actually ask, am I listening from the right place inside myself? And so I want to share with you, I was exposed a number of years ago to some teachings from some Sufi teachings that come out of a lineage from Morocco that speak to different layers of the heart to which we can be listening. And I want to share that with you because I found this very useful. And according to this teaching, there are 4 different layers of the heart. The first layer is the layer, sometimes this is called the layer of what the Sufis would call the nafs, N-A-F-S. It's not really completely accurate because actually nafs are like sanskaras and they actually are in all layers of the heart. But sometimes they think of this as sort of, some people say, well, these are the most gross layers, layer. But this is the layer of thought. And it's, that if you think about the mind and how it works, this is what sometimes people refer to as the chatter of the mind. It's all the mental stuff that goes on in our mind. This is the first layer. And it's sort of, it's fueled by feelings and emotions, but it is not feelings and emotions. It is our mental constructs that are driven by feelings and emotions. So, it's sort of like, I like this person, this is a mean person, this is a fun thing to be doing, I don't think this is a very good talk that I'm going to, whatever it is, that's all chatter of the mind. And this layer is largely driven by two forces. One is to pursue pleasure and maximize pleasure, and the other one is to avoid pain. That's the main motive power at the first layer of the mind, first layer of the heart. The second layer of the heart are actually the emotions that are driving the first layer of the heart. And these are typically anger, sadness, fear, pleasure. And these are in reaction to things. This is like, oh, this is I feel pleasure because this person was nice to me, or I feel frustrated because I've been made to wait in line, or whatever it is. But it's usually in reaction to stuff. And it's all impermanent. It's sort of like, I think Baba once described it, it's like at the surface level of the ocean, riding on the surface of the waves, they go up and down. Today we're happy, tomorrow we're sad, today we're depressed, whatever it is. But, and Baba had a phrase that I associate with this one, which is Baba used this phrase, it's like feverish imagination working under the stimulus of desires. And I think that's a good description of the second layer of the mind. It has nothing to do with anything permanent. It has nothing to do with any truth. It's just reacting. It's just in response to our own desires and how they fit the context and the circumstances we find ourselves in. Now, when we get to the third layer, is actually what they would call the heart. This is actually where the heart, what they would call the heart. And it's interesting that that in Arabic, the word for heart means that which turns. It's a very, the Arabic is a beautiful language, has, it's a very poetic language. That's what the word heart means. Which means, and what that's saying is, the heart can be turned toward the world, or it can be turned toward God. It goes here, it goes here. That's the nature of the heart. But nevertheless, they call this third layer the layer of the heart. And this is actually where we first begin turning toward God, is in the third layer. And this is when this is the layer where intuition starts to show itself. And it is the gateway to the deeper self, right? This is where we're starting to align with the divine. We're shifting away from pleasure seeking and avoiding pain. This is where we're asking the beloved, what are you asking of us? This is where we're actually starting to get guidance, is from this third layer here. But to get here, there has to be a silencing of the first two layers. You can't get here without those first two layers being silenced. And that's no small thing, as we know. That's something that is achieved sometimes through great effort, sometimes through great suffering, great pain, whatever it is. But that's very often what it takes to open up to that third layer. And the fourth layer, they call the layer of the secret. And I don't profess to know that much about this layer from the Sufis, other than it is a more permanent establishment in that deeper layer. So if the third layer, there's still this, I'm in the third layer, now I flip back to the second layer like this, there's more of that. The fourth layer is clearly a deeper establishment there. And it is a layer that leads into the realms of illumination, inspiration, and realization. That's what the fourth layer. Now, again, I don't claim that this is a complete comports completely with what Baba said, but it's actually not that distant from what Baba said. Let me show you. This is what Baba said, and I think this is a really terrific statement about intuition. He said, when you feel something is intuitive and you have no doubt about it, then know it is real. Passing doubtful thoughts and temporary emotional feelings should not be given importance. Got that? That's first and second layer. That's what he's saying. But when you feel that it touches your heart, that's third layer, follow it. When it is from the mind, it is not intuition. Intuition means that which comes from the heart. In the divine path, first there's intuition, third layer. Then inspiration, then illumination, fourth layer. And then finally realization, which is beyond all the layers. If it touches your heart, follow it. And God willing, from today, you'll know that if it is intuition, it is right. This maps almost exactly against, for me anyway, against that. Against the...
Daniel, where is that from?
I'd have to find it for you. Yeah. Write to me and I'll see if I can find it. And I have found this paradigm of the four layers actually to be very useful, because it's a way of orienting myself, like what layer am I in when I'm doing this? Like, I was, like earlier today, I was trying to get to a place inside myself to sort of get guidance about how to be present, how to be present here today from Baba. And I could find myself, I was right in the first and second layers. I was worried, all this chatter, like, am I ready for this? Like, that's all first layer stuff. That's fear stuff. Then there was sort of the nervousness of the second layer, like that. And I was aware, I can't look to those two layers to guide me. I've got to get beyond those layers into that third layer if I'm going to get any kind of useful guidance on this. So I find this a useful model to follow for myself. The other thing I found, and this is a little trickier to explain, but when I've learned to listen to my heart in this way, and again, this is a journey, this is something, this is a practice I've been doing, and I am obviously an imperfect student of this practice, so I'm not giving this to you like I've perfected anything here. I'm sure you don't expect that of me, but I just need to say it. Need to say the disclaimer. But what I have learned. Sorry?
I do.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually, I was looking at you. What I've learned, I learned something that the way I've learned to listen to my heart has changed over time. And I've learned that if I can make my heart, I use the word, I don't have the right word for it. Sometimes I say I rely on sort of the plasticity of my heart. Or I make it into like a jello that can form itself into any mold. And so I kind of make it as fluid as possible and wait for Baba to come in and shape the feeling of my heart. That's the best I can say. So, for example, if I say, how should I go to Baba and say, how should I relate to this person? And I go through a process like that, and I find my heart feeling very open and warm. It says to me, well, I'm intended to, what's been asked of me is to be open and embracing with that person. Or if I say to Baba, how should I relate to this person? And I feel, and the feeling that comes in, and my heart takes a kind of more remote, distant feel to it. It says, so keep some distance, like that. That's what I mean by sort of paying attention. First of all, going into the experience of it. What is my heart experiencing, and allow it to experience it, and then step back and observe the experience and say, okay, well that's my own way of understanding what does it mean. So again, I'm talking about what's the language with which Baba expresses guidance, which Baba expresses wish, and that's what I've come to, is that that's how he does it. Baba said, we all know, in fact, I think he said the only book I shall make people read is the Book of the Heart. So you don't need to go to the Ward Parks or seminars anymore and read Infinite Intelligence and all that stuff, because this is actually the only book. I don't mean that, but Baba said this is the only book that I shall make you read, which is the Book of the Heart, which alone holds the key to the mystery of life. That's what he said. And so learning to read the heart in this way, to me, is central, I have found, to what does it mean to actually follow Baba.
Could I add something?
Yeah.
Quick, two-sided. I heard also you mention Elizabeth Patterson, and that she also said, when I asked her, Baba, what would you like of me today? She said, then I just sit and I wait and focus on Baba. And some years ago, I was part of a group project with Don Stevens writing a book called Mayor Baba's Gift of Intuition. And when I was doing my research for my chapter, I came across a quote where he said, and I forget where, but if you don't make use of and apply the intuitions you receive, the flow will be cut off, and you won't get more.
It's a really powerful. Yeah. So I'm gonna open it up for more comments also later on. So I'm just I want to keep a thread going here. So but thank you for that. But to me, this then leads to and I think this is in keeping with what you're saying. It leads then to another concept that I also think is very relevant and important, and that I would call the concept of reliance. Because that really is that if learning to receive guidance is one thing, learning to rely on guidance in an ongoing way is the next step of that, which is what I think you're speaking of, Stuart. Now, just going back to Sufism for a moment, there was a concept in Sufism called tawakkul. And tawakkul means literally reliance on the one. That's what it's translated as. And it is, according to Sufis I know of, it is considered one of the most, if not the most important quality for an aspirant to cultivate, is reliance. And of course, Baba encouraged us to learn to rely on him. Right? He said, make me your father and your mother. Right? Isn't that the essence of reliance? Is if you have a father and a mother, and the way he's talking about it, isn't that what you're supposed to do with your father and mother, is rely on them for everything? And one of the people who I thought was the most, who I heard the most speak the most about this was Vanuatu. And he wrote a series of books called Conversations with the Awakener. And those of you who know Val probably knew this about him because he would speak about this a lot. But I was always impressed with those conversations because in those conversations are almost nothing but a statement of his reliance on Baba. That's essentially what those conversations are all about, as far as I'm concerned. That's the point I got. Because he said he would go to Baba and rely on Baba for everything. Not just big things, everything. You know, if he was at a bus stop somewhere and he needed something to eat, Bob, show me where I should go to eat. And Bob would show him where to go to eat. At that level. He wasn't just talking about these big, high spiritual things. He was talking about everything in his life like that. That's what reliance means, is everything in life is brought to Baba and asked and brought in front of Baba and say, what are you asking of me? What can you provide me relative to this or that? So, creating a reliance in this way, though, is not necessarily a completely easy thing, because actually the first thing it means is giving up our own personal preferences. Like there are times I go to Bob and I'll ask for something, and I'll say, well, what do you want me to do in relation to this? And Bob will tell me to do something that's actually quite distasteful to me. That I'm not, okay, Baba, I'll do it. And I'll do it wholeheartedly. But it's not necessarily what I would have chosen myself, like that. That happens a lot. That's not occasional. So there has to, first of all, be that willingness to sort of suspend personal preferences, just like Duncan probably suspended his preference to actually stay with Baba when he felt, no, Baba actually wants me to go do this, like that. So I think reliance also means risk-taking. I don't think this is like, this isn't the world of immediate guarantees. This is the world of risk-taking. And one of the people that was really influential for me was Kitty Davey about this, maybe for some of you in this room too. Because Kitty would, to me, Kitty was both a model of reliance. It seemed to me that's her whole life was spent, relying on Baba for everything. But she also would, in different kinds of ways, I think, encourage me anyway, to take risks with Baba. But taking risks means developing trust, right? That it's all about trusting Baba. So there are a couple of quotes that I like about this. This is a quote that has been meaningful to me for many years. I first read it, and it was attributed to Gurdjieff. But then I was looking up for this talk, and I looked on the internet, and it was attributed to Winston Churchill. So maybe Churchill was Gurdjieff. I don't know. I think Churchill was a pretty amazing man. But I like this quote a lot. And I think that this has really been the truth for me in my life. It says, play with more than you can afford to lose, and then you'll learn to play the game. That's what I call risk-taking. That's not sort of what movie should I go to. That's like, give up your 16-year permanent job and go into private practice for yourself. That for me was risk-taking. Like that was jumping off the edge of a cliff and assuming Baba's going to carry me in a parachute into a better place. Because I didn't think I could afford to lose a steady job. I mean, I have a young child. I have, a lot of responsibility then. That doesn't sound to me like more than I could afford to lose. And yet that was the guidance. So you jump and you sort of get. And that, to me, that was really how I felt like I started to learn a little bit about how the game is played. This is another quote. I heard this quote from Adi Kairani. I think he got it from Baba directly, and this is not an exact quote, so I don't want you to take it as an exact quote, but it's pretty close. Baba, he said, and I think this is Baba who said it, in matters of health, take no risks. In matters of wealth, take some risks. And in matters of God, take every risk. Good quote. It's good. Yeah. So I found that coming to a place of relying on Baba through obedience means turning my life's choices over to him. It means, and not just the little ones, but the big ones, and learning to trust in the inner guidance and follow the inner guidance as best as I can learn to read it. Even if it's a little fuzzy, to do my best to sort of say, well, this is the best I can get out of this, so I'll follow that. It may not be crystal clear, but it's clear enough that I sort of get a sense about what I should do, and I'll follow that. That's what to me, it means to follow, in my life, to follow their guidance. And also to accept that it's a learning process, that it's not going to all be necessarily, quote, right the first time, and yet by trusting by trusting that if I'm sincere about it, if I'm genuine and sincere about it, that there is going to be some inbuilt protection from Baba of me. So even if it's wrong, it will still be under the aura of Baba's protection out of my intention, out of the sincerity of my intention. Henry Fashaudy, I heard him say once, some of you, he may have said this many times, I only heard it once, but he once said that when it comes to our relationship with God, many of us are like the person who's inherited $1 million, but is sitting on the sidewalk outside the bank begging for pennies. Any of you ever hear him say that?
Did you say that again?
Yeah. He said, when it comes to our relationship with God, many of us are like the person who has inherited $1 million, but we're sit on the sidewalk outside the bank begging like paupers for pennies. I thought it was a great metaphor of what he said. Because he's saying that Baba has assured us that the wealth of God is available to us. It's there for the taking, if we'll only turn to him and ask for it. But many of us don't do it. Many of us continue to sort of look for other ways to make our decisions, take our choices like that, rather than going directly to that source and say, that source is right there. All we've got to do is go in there and ask for it and take it. Because he's assured us. Baba said, I'm always speaking. My voice is always there. The voice of inspiration, of intuition, guidance is always there. If we would just go there and take it. That's what he's talking about the bank and what's there in the bank for us. So I would feel that practicing obedience the way we're talking about here is a way to claim that inheritance from God. It's the opportunity he's given us by opening the channel to our hearts. Through his silence, I would suggest, going back to the beginning of what I was saying, to be able to go to him, fully place ourselves before him in a spirit of reliance, and then receive and follow his guidance. And by doing so, then we can fully and continually align ourselves with him, and in the process become freer. And that was what Baba wanted for us, was freedom, to become freer. So, when I think, going back to the title of this talk, to me, when I think of obedience as being a gift for the master of the man, I think the great gift that he's given us is that bank account, is that source within us that we can draw upon at any time for our own guidance that allows us to align with him through the voice of intuition. And he's assured us that his voice is always there, it's always a core source of guidance, and he's encouraged us repeatedly to take fullest advantage of that gift. Now, we've been talking here so far at kind of the level of individuals. Like we're all individuals. We have our own relationship with Baba. We're all seeking this for our own selves. But what about humanity as a whole? Let's talk about the gift from the master to humanity, not just to man. Let's kind of bump this up one level. Because Baba said his work was universal, and that all creation would eventually feel and receive of it. And he said that his advent was the end of a cycle of cycles. And he said his manifestation would be the greatest of all. And that something would happen that has never happened before. Now, I don't know if you're like me, I've always wondered, what is that? What is this wonderful thing that's going to happen that's never happened before? Any of you ever wondered what that was? Yeah, it's quite a thing, So, a year or two ago, I was listening to a YouTube talk that Charles had given in LA. I think it was in LA. It's a beautiful talk. It's available on YouTube. You can see it. And he was addressing this question. And he said, he shared his view that what would happen that has never happened before is that through Baba's silence and the awakening that he would bring through silence, everyone in the world would shift their mode of being. And the shift would be away from small s self to listening to and following that inner voice of God. He said that's never happened. He said that would actually be the transformative experience of Baba's ultimate manifestation. And it was really quite something. To me, that answered a lot. It was like the first time I had actually an image of what this great thing would be. Because if that happened, Charles said there's never been an entire civilization of people who were tuned to the voice of God. But if there was, that would be the new humanity. That would be the new humanity that Bob has been speaking about since the 1930s. So that means that an entire civilization would be awakened to the joy of feeling the voice of divine intuition and inspiration, and not only listening to the voice, but aligning themselves with that voice. In other words, that means living lives in obedience to the higher voice within, which we know as Mary Baba. Oops. Missing a slide. So let me go back to the beginning here. So Baba said, going back to the beginning here, that Baba gives us this precious gift of love that he's given to every single one of us. That's a gift from God to man. He says that as our master, he's given us this gift of obedience, which is the opening of that inner channel. That's the gift, is the opening of the inner channel that we can then listen to and then use that as the means for aligning ourselves with his wish. And finally, then from there's the gift of our surrender. And the gift of our surrender is our complete wholehearted acceptance of everything that he gives us as coming from the one who loves us more, as he said, more than we can love ourselves. And as Hafez would say, that what he gives us is of the highest benefit to all concerned. And that's the spirit of surrender, is trusting that that's what's been given to us. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I wanted to open it up for comments and responses, questions, other points of view. So thank you very much. Yeah, Pamela.
Can I just ask that people, if you wouldn't mind, would you go up and ask questions so that you can be in the video?
Thanks. This isn't a question, but when Daniel was mentioning what Henry Kashauti had said, it reminded me of something Merwan Jasawala had said on a recent trip to India. Recent relative, given that he's no longer with us. But he had said, we've had so many lifetimes and we've lived them in all of these ways. This lifetime, gamble it for God. Gamble this lifetime on God and you will not lose this gamble. So it just, it totally related to Henry's comment.
Thank you. What are your thoughts? So let me ask you, how did that land for you? Did that resonate for you? Does that sort of how your own experience? Does that kind of, where are you with this?
You mean get up overall?
Yeah, Pat.
Oh, my knees. Frankly, I am very grateful for your presentation here today. This is lovely. Thank you so much. And it all resonated very powerfully with me. And part of it for me really, having started out as a 14-year-old kid as a Bible follower, and being with Elizabeth, the idea of obedience is very powerful. Because when you're a teenager, you certainly don't know what to do, or how to do it, or whether or not you should do it. It seems as simple as, do I wear a button to the high school, and Elizabeth saying, you can't do that. Or having guidance has always been a part of my path. The other thing, and so I enjoyed putting that into perspective, it made a lot of sense. The other thing is, when you did the 4 levels of the heart, being a hypnotherapist and someone who studied the levels of the brain, it was really beta, alpha, theta, and getting on down into delta, which is actually that deep part of communication with spirit. And I thought to myself, yeah, I do that with people when I've done work on a lot of different levels with people, getting, helping them to get past that conversation and the confusion and the silliness and moving on to those other levels. And then, so it was really nice to hear that level 3, which is theta, which is really about getting into, it made sense. Because I've always said that hypnotherapy was communication with the soul, if you can get people deep enough. That it shouldn't be up there, but down here. So I really enjoyed that as well. I mean, so much of what you said was just was just so lovely. And one other word that I want to interject is faith. We don't use that word in the Baba community, but essentially surrender, obedience. These things come from faith. Faith is something that comes from that third level of conscious awareness in the heart. And so faith, I keep saying to people, but what about your faith in Baba? What about your faith? Why are you so confused? Where's your faith?
Great.
Yeah, so I just
Great.
wanted to
I
put
think
that
the word
out.
I would use is trust.
Well, that
It's
as
the-
well.
It's the same,
It's the
to me, it's
same-
the same
Yeah, it
concept.
depends where you're coming from and all your different things,
Yeah.
but if there is something that resonates, then that word kept coming to me as faith
Great.
just now. And yeah, it's really, and the other thing was, this is really important information. That's the other thing I want to say. Is that so many people, young people within our community, this should be at Sahabas, okay? This is what our children need to learn, because that's why they're confused. They haven't had the master's touch physically, and master could be anyone who's guiding them in some levels. They haven't had Elizabeth or Kitty or this person or that person to say, don't do this, do that, this is how you follow Baba. Or this is how you get the message from Baba. So it's not written anywhere. And I think this is important.
To me, this was, as I'm sure many in this room, maybe everybody in this room, but I know my own experience was going through the wilderness to find this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
This was
Oh,
not
yeah.
handed on a platter.
Exactly.
This is a process of discovery, and it's through a lot of trial and error and a lot of going into some pretty dark places to really start to understand that these are concepts, principles that really make a difference. Anybody else?
I just wanted to, this gave me a, no,
No?
no. This gave me a framework, that's all.
Yeah.
And it's very simple, the framework upon which to hang intuition and the levels of the heart. So I like the framework.
I'll just add great insight and contemplation on your part. And have you written this up?
Yeah, so this is everything I've presented, most everything I've presented here is an article that I submitted to the Globe, so I'm hoping you'll be published
An
sometime
article
next
what,
year.
Daniel?
It's been submitted to the Globe
Oh, the
for
Globe.
publication, so my expectation, it'll probably publish in maybe
You
next
cover
year.
this whole talk? pretty
The
much?
whole, yeah, pretty much everything I've shared.
Awesome.
There's some updating I've done of some things here that are not in the article, but it's pretty much the same articles here. And there's another piece to it, which, if you want, I can share with you too. Jeff, are you going to say something? Oh, I thought you were.
Arms up here.
This one.
Well, I thought a lot about Kitty and how Kitty talked. Do you want me to? Okay. Kitty spoke so much over the years about intuition and how we need to really practice our intuition and that we'll make mistakes, but it's okay. That's just part of learning to hear, learning to attune to what Baba's saying within. But I think she spoke about that so much, and also about pleasing Baba. She would speak about that over and over again. And I love the way she approached it, because she talked about it as if we were all on the same journey. We were all trying to attune ourselves to Baba's presence and guidance within. She as much as any of us. And she would talk about, she raised those questions about, or the points about thinking things that we would not hesitate to think in Baba's presence. doing deeds that we would not hesitate to do in Baba's presence, and saying words that we would not hesitate